Number 11. Egypt Covington. One day in 2016, 27-year-old Egypt Covington was watching a movie at home in Van Buren Township, Michigan, when a pair of armed intruders barged into her duplex. They bound her with Christmas lights and shot her in the head. As it turned out, Covington's neighbor was away at a music festival that day. The building's maintenance man, Shane Lamar Evans, knew that the resident wouldn't be there and that there was probably marijuana in his apartment. Evans allegedly conspired with two other men, Timothy Eugene Moore and Shandon Ray Groom, to rob Covington's neighbor's apartment. Not wanting to participate directly in the break-in, Evans told Groom and Moore which unit to break into. They somehow accidentally targeted Covington's apartment. All three men were charged with felony murder and home invasion, and Groom and Moore were hit with several weapons counts. According to the most recent updates, the trio are still awaiting trial. Number 10. David Sommer. On a hot summer day in 2017, a Meals on Wheels delivery man found 61-year-old former journalist David Sommer dead in his Pinellas County, Florida home. There was significant damage to his head from what was later ruled as a homicide by blunt force trauma. Sommer's mental and physical health had declined significantly after he was laid off from his job at the Tampa Tribune. He became somewhat of a recluse as his mobility worsened, and he began to depend on Meals on Wheels and neighbors for help with basic things like food and housework. The killer made off with several $100s that Sommer always had in his possession, pointing toward robbery as a potential motive. At the time, he was separated from his wife, Jeannie, and a divorce was in the works. But after interviewing her, detectives determined that it was unlikely that she was involved in her estranged husband's murder. Jeannie had a confirmed alibi, stood to gain nothing financially from David's death, and seemed genuinely devastated. Investigators also considered the possibility that someone held a grudge against Sommers, perhaps for something he wrote in a crime article. But they found no evidence that this was the case. Other than that, Sommer appeared to be well liked within his community, and nothing about his lifestyle or history stood out as a major red flag. The first major break in the case came when a neighbor mentioned Michael Harbaugh, who had performed yard work for the victim in the past. Harbaugh told police that he mowed Sommer's lawn shortly before the murder. Everything went fine, and Sommer paid Harbaugh. He insisted he had nothing to do with the crime, but law enforcement remained suspicious. A grand jury eventually determined that there was enough circumstantial evidence to indict Harbaugh for murder. While he was locked up awaiting trial, a jailhouse informant reported that Harbaugh had confessed to the murder. The inmate, Alan Kruger, provided details about the crime that authorities hadn't released to the public, proving that he has insider knowledge. He was brought on board to testify for the prosecution in Harbaugh's upcoming trial. During a phone call with his girlfriend, Harbaugh asked his girlfriend to bond out a fellow inmate, Brandon Gentry, and to pick the man up from jail. He said that the man would help prove his innocence. Prosecutors caught wind of the plan and stopped it from happening. They later found out that Harbaugh was plotting with Gentry to kill Kruger so that he couldn't testify as a witness at trial. Needless to say, Harbaugh only dug himself a deeper hole. He ultimately took a plea deal and was sentenced to 30 years with an earliest possible release date of 2047. He'll be 66 years old. Number 9. Brian Rain. After graduating from veterinary school during the 1990s, Brian Rain opened his own clinic in the small town of Geraldine, Montana. His promising career and future were cut short in 1996 when his landlord found him dead in his trailer home with a gunshot wound to the chest and 2 in his arm. He was shot with his own gun, and the investigation initially concluded that he took his own life. But his body showed signs of a struggle, causing detectives to rethink the situation. Unfortunately, the responding officers contaminated the crime scene while trying to clean up the blood, and catching the killer would prove to be extraordinarily difficult and complicated. Based on the evidence, it appeared as though the killer fired the first shot outside Brian's trailer. The murder happened sometime after he last spoke to his girlfriend, Ann Wishman, 2 nights earlier on the phone. Ann told investigators that their conversation had ended abruptly. It was no secret that her ex-boyfriend, Thomas Jaroszewski, was unhappy about her relationship with Brian. Thomas and Dan had broken up shortly before she began seeing the veterinarian, who was now dead on the floor of his home. In the time leading up to the murder, Thomas harassed the couple with repeated hang-up phone calls. One night he barged into Brian's home while Anne was there to ask Brian what his intentions with Anne were. On another occasion, Thomas showed up at Brian's house at night, saying he was having car trouble and asking to use the phone. Naturally, when Brian turned up dead, he quickly landed at the top of law enforcement's suspect list. Detectives also looked strongly at a friend of Brian's named Larry Hagenbuch, who had allegedly trash-talked the veterinarian shortly before the murder. Both he and Thomas Jaroszewski denied involvement in the crime. Thomas admitted that his past behavior toward the victim was over the top, but insisted he would never go as far as killing Brian and that he no longer had any ill feelings towards him. But he lacked an alibi and seemed like the only person with a motive. He was arrested for murder in 1998, but was soon freed due to a lack of physical evidence connecting him to the crime. Unfortunately, the murder scene was contaminated by poor police work. Officers failed to collect DNA or fingerprint evidence, and they threw some crucial items in the garbage, including a cell phone. The case went cold, but a new prosecutor decided to try the case against Thomas in 2014 based on purely circumstantial evidence. A jury found him not guilty, and Brian's murder remains unsolved to this day, although many remain convinced that Thomas had something to do with it. Number 8. ELINOR "Dolly" AVENATTI. In early 2023, a historic blizzard dumped 10 feet 3 meters of snow on California's San Bernardino Mountains, where 93-year-old ELINOR "Dolly" AVENATTI lived alone. Dolly suffered from dementia, but had few medical problems otherwise and was in good health for her age. She was unaware of the severity of the incoming storm, but knew that the area was expecting snow and warned her family members not to visit due to road conditions. During one phone call with a relative, Dolly lost power. It took about 20 minutes for it to be restored, but Dolly seemed mostly unconcerned, describing the conditions outside as a winter wonderland. When her loved ones learned of another, more prolonged power outage in her area, they urged authorities to rescue her. By then, hundreds of rescue missions were already underway, and Dolly was snowed in. In the meantime, neighbors did their best to check on her and bring her food. During one of these visits, a neighbor found her dead near her fireplace. Dolly most likely froze to death. When she was found, she had been without electricity for days, had no phone service, and had very little food. Her great-niece, Valerie Bryan Compton, told NBC News that if it weren't for the conditions brought on by the storm, she strongly believes Dolly would still be alive. Sadly, she was one of at least 12 Californians who were found dead during welfare checks after the record snowfall. Many were already under medical care or needed medical attention that they couldn't get because they were housebound by the storm. Speaking with the Los Angeles Times, Michelle Hake described how her sister was at home alone and needed help, but it didn't reach her on time, and she passed away. Another community member discovered an elderly man who had been rationing a frozen tamale for 5 days straight, with nothing else to eat. These unfortunate discoveries bring attention to the heightened dangers that people who live alone face during natural disasters, especially the elderly and other vulnerable individuals. Number 7. Betty Jo McClain Thomas. When a cable technician showed up at the Irving, Texas home of 83-year-old Betty Jo McClain Thomas in 2019, she let him inside. He had performed a service call at the house for a broken fax machine the day before and said that he needed to make some additional repairs. Thomas had no reason to suspect he would be there for any other reason, especially since he was driving an official company van. But the technician, Roy James Holden Jr., wasn't on the clock, nor was he at Thomas's house to perform repairs. He was there to rob the senior citizen, who was found stabbed to death by her family later that evening after she failed to show up at a gathering. Holden stole the victim's credit cards and ID and went on a shopping spree, according to prosecutors, who charged the killer cableman with murder. He pleaded guilty and received a life sentence without parole. Thomas's surviving family members sued the cable company for failing to verify Holden's past employment during the hiring process. If they had done so, they would have discovered that he was lying about his former jobs. The company probably wouldn't have hired him, and Thomas might still be alive. In a landmark ruling, a jury ordered Spectrum Cable to pay $7 billion to the family as a punishment for negligence and $375 million in compensatory damages. Number 6. Reginald Sanford. After becoming concerned about the well-being of 84-year-old Reginald Sanford in early 2020, the senior citizen's neighbors went to check on him and found him dead inside his Granby, Massachusetts home. When police arrived, they immediately noticed that Sanford was the victim of an obvious stabbing. 2 bloody fingerprints and a blood-saturated pair of jeans left behind at the scene led investigators to a young woman named Iana Torres. According to prosecutors, surveillance footage captured her hiding the victim's stolen car in an alley. Torres allegedly admitted to stabbing Sanford during an argument and was charged with murder. Authorities declined to elaborate on the relationship between the suspect and the victim, or if Torres had a valid reason to be at Sanford's house, and there have been few updates on the case since the story first broke. At the time of Sanford's murder, Torres was out on bail for a cocaine possession charge. By then, she already had a long list of prior brushes with the law, which included multiple drug-related arrests and allegations of assault against police officers. It's unclear where the case currently stands. Number 5. Shirley Pierce. Single mom Shirley Pierce was a successful career woman who worked as an administrative assistant at a textile factory in Rowan County, North Carolina. She had been working there for many years when she met her partner, textile salesman Chuck Reeves. In 2013, after 4 years of dating, the couple got engaged. Sadly, they never made it to the altar. Just a few months after proposing to Shirley, Chuck found her stabbed to death in her bathtub. He seemed genuinely distraught over the murder, and police were quick to put him on the back burner while focusing on other persons of interest. The couple had been talking on the phone the previous evening when the call suddenly disconnected, but the cell phone signal in the area was known to be weak, and it wasn't uncommon for calls to get dropped, so Chuck didn't worry too much when it happened. Shortly into the investigation, law enforcement received a call from Irvin Johnson, the CFO at the textile company where Shirley worked. He explained that his wife, Marlene, had experienced a breakdown in recent years and was never quite the same afterward. Marlene became possessive and paranoid and was convinced that Irvin was cheating on her with Shirley, even though their friendship was strictly platonic. She went out of her way to try busting her husband for the non-existent affair, even hiring private investigators to monitor Shirley's daily activities with drones. The stalking and harassment went on for years leading up to Shirley's murder. On one occasion, a waitress caught Marlene spying on Shirley's group and alerted them to her presence. As they were leaving the restaurant, Marlene attacked Shirley. Her behavior became so extreme that she and Irvin separated. She began dating someone new, yet remained fixated on proving that Irvin was having an affair. Police connected Marlene to the crime scene through DNA, cell phone data, and other evidence. She was convicted of murder and is serving life without parole. Number 4. Zachary Peters. 23-year-old Zachary Peters was napping at home in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma one day in 2017 when the sounds of a slamming door and shattering glass woke him up. He grabbed his rifle right before a trio of masked burglars barged into the house. Peters fatally shot the intruders, barricaded himself in his bedroom for safety, and dialed 911. The district attorney's office deemed the shooting as justified and cleared Peters of any wrongdoing, but they opted to pursue a case against the thieves' getaway driver, 21-year-old Elizabeth Rodriguez, who fled the scene when she heard gunshots. She was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of burglary. Although she didn't kill the young men directly, prosecutors held her responsible for their deaths based on her involvement in the burglary. According to law enforcement, Rodriguez and the 3 other suspects had robbed a spare apartment at Peters' property earlier that day. They returned to rob the main part of the house when they encountered Peters and were shot. Rodriguez pleaded guilty to 3 reduced counts of second-degree murder and received a 45-year prison sentence. Wayne Smithert, who fostered and adopted one of the young men who was killed in the botched invasion, told 2 News Oklahoma that he was devastated, but that he wasn't going to make excuses for his son's poor decision, which tragically cost him his life. Number 3. Mindy Morgenstern. When 22-year-old Mindy Morgenstern stopped answering her phone in 2006, 2 of her friends went to check on the college senior at her off-campus apartment in New Salem, North Dakota. They were horrified to find the young woman dead on the floor with a belt wrapped around her neck. The killer had doused her in Pine Sol before fleeing the scene. Mindy's wallet and phone were found beside her, and nothing in the apartment appeared to be disturbed, ruling out the likelihood of a robbery gone wrong. In fact, it was unclear why someone asphyxiated and slashed her to death, because none of the evidence pointed to a specific motive. In their search for leads, detectives learned that Mindy disliked one of her friend's boyfriends, who she thought was abusive. She had encouraged her friend to break up with the man, but he had an alibi and was also ruled out by DNA. The DNA found beneath Mindy's fingernails was a match to the unknown perpetrator of an assault in Fargo that had occurred 2 years earlier. Investigators finally identified the suspect after running DNA tests on Mindy's neighbors. It belonged to Mo Gibbs, a corrections officer who lived in her building. He had previously told police that he noticed nothing out of the ordinary on the day of the murder other than the overwhelming stench of Pine Sol. A background check revealed that Gibbs had changed his name in 2005 and that he had served time in a military prison for attempted murder while still living under his previous name. During questioning about Mindy's murder, police noticed fresh scratches on his hands. Gibbs eventually admitted to being in Mindy's apartment shortly before the murder, claiming that he had helped her to carry a laundry basket inside after seeing her struggle with it. He denied being involved with the crime and also acted shocked when detectives confronted him about the assault in Fargo. Authorities charged Gibbs in connection with both crimes, and more women came forward with assault allegations. He pleaded guilty to the assault charges, but went to trial for Mindy's murder. The first trial ended in a hung jury, but he was found guilty at the end of a second trial. He's serving a life sentence with no possibility of parole. Gibbs never explained why he killed Mindy, but prosecutors believe he tried to assault her and lost his temper when he didn't get his way. Number 2. Maria Hernandez. After attending a show together one evening in early 2023, 74-year-old Maria Hernandez and her sister returned to their apartment building on Manhattan's Upper West Side, where they lived in separate units. A little while later, a neighbor stopped by with a piece of cake. It was the last time Maria was seen alive. When her daughter tried calling later that night and Maria didn't pick up, the woman called her aunt and asked her to check on her mother. Maria's lifeless body was found bound, gagged, and covered in lacerations and bruises. There were no signs of forced entry and nothing appeared to be missing, leaving police unsure of the killer's motive. While searching for surveillance footage, investigators entered the building's superintendent's office and found that it had been broken into. Someone had cut the cables to the surveillance system and stolen the equipment. Police believe that the same person may have entered Maria's apartment with intentions to rob her, and that the situation may have taken an unexpected deadly turn. About a month later, 47-year-old LaShawn Mackey and 53-year-old Terrence Moore were indicted on first-degree murder charges in connection with Maria's death. At the time of the murder, Moore was on lifetime parole for past murder and robbery convictions, which he served 27 years for. Mackey, who once worked as a super at Maria's building, had also done time and had been released in 2019 after serving 20 years for first-degree assault. Detectives reportedly connected the suspects to the crime through video footage captured from other buildings. Number 1. Amber Babcock. While responding to a call about a disturbance in Interlaken, Florida in early 2023, Putnam County deputies entered a residence and found 64-year-old Reginald Best laying on the floor, handcuffed with a gunshot wound to his neck. The homeowner, 67-year-old Amber Babcock, told officers that she didn't know the man she had just shot. She thought her husband was arriving home from work a little while earlier when she heard someone at the door, so she unlocked it. Best barged into the house and ignored Babcock's commands to leave. When she saw that the intruder had a gun, She feared for her life and fired a single bullet to disarm him. Unfortunately, Bess died from his injuries. But authorities concluded that the shooting was justified and declined to pursue charges against Babcock. In a statement to Newsweek, Sheriff H.D. Gator DeLoach said that the incident is a perfect example of why he supports the right of law-abiding citizens to own guns. He also pointed out that the outcome of the situation could have been much worse for Babcock if she wasn't armed. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be snowed in alone for a week at a remote place with no phone service, or live by yourself in an area where an organized group of serial burglars routinely target victims who are home alone? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye!